Something the Corinthians said or did evidently touched a nerve for Paul. For in his extended discussion regarding the burning question of whether or not it was proper to eat meat sacrificed to idols, Paul inserts a rather raw warning. Don't take your place in the kingdom for granted, he says. The children of Israel did it after their exodus from Egypt, and it didn't go well for them. It's a bit of tough love that the Corinthians apparently needed to hear. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Saturday, March 26th, 2022. Paul's discussion of eating meat sacrificed to idols has been an extended discussion that has occupied us for most of this week and which won't be finished until Monday. It has taken us in a number of directions. In some ways, we put ourselves at a disadvantage when we break up sections like this into small chunks because it all makes more sense when we read the whole thing as one continuous piece. But that's hard to do in the confines of a Sunday sermon, let alone in the even narrower confines of a daily devotional. So, just to recap, Paul tells the Corinthians that while they might be technically correct in saying it is okay to eat meat sacrificed to idols, since those idols represent non-existent gods, the fact remains that the practice has scandalized some of the members of the community, so much so that it has become a hindrance in their ability to bear witness to the gospel. Better to give up the right to eat the meat than to hamper the church's more important work. Yesterday, we saw him use an analogy from athletics, namely, that athletes, in order to achieve their goal, routinely subordinate many good things in life to the greater goal of winning the prize of their event. Now his argument takes another turn which almost seems like a distraction, but which on reflection turns out to be an important word to the Corinthians. Here's what he says. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them, and they were struck down in the wilderness. Now, these things occurred as examples to us, so that we might not desire evil as they did. Do not become idolaters, as some of them did, as it is written. The people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Therefore, my friends, flee from the worship of idols. But wait a minute, you say. Hasn't Paul agreed that eating meat sacrificed to idols is not the same thing as worshiping those idols? So what is this idolatry he's talking about here? Well, let's see what he might mean. The children of Israel were direct witnesses to one of God's mightiest acts, freeing them from Egypt, rescuing them from the hands of the pursuing Egyptian army, shepherding them through the Red Sea, and destroying the Egyptian army. Having seen it and lived it, says Paul, they apparently grew overconfident of their place in God's kingdom. They took God for granted and began to practice all sorts of idolatry. As a result, God decreed that the original generation of those who had been freed from Egypt would not be around to see the promised land itself. Many of them even suffered punishment in the form of serpents in the desert. The message to the Corinthians is clear. Do not take God's grace for granted. You still have to be obedient to God and captive to the Word. But what is their idolatry? Very simple. Their own desire to exult in their newfound spiritual freedom. They are indeed free to eat meat sacrificed to idols, many thought, because those idols don't represent any real gods. So it's just meat after all. But when they elevated their own personal right to eat that meat, and it came at the expense of the health of the church, well, their right to eat became, in effect, an idol in and of itself, just as surely as if they had participated in sacrificing animals to those idols. It's a tough love message Paul delivers here, but one the Corinthians clearly needed to hear. When we return on Monday, Paul wraps up this discussion of eating meat sacrificed to idols, and he pulls all these different threads together. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.